the encrypted crossword forward from the global mail.
Oh, good. Okay. When did you get hold? I mean, you told me about it, but when did you learn about these things?
I learned about these 2 years ago.
Okay.
Joint math related.
Yeah.
Because there's a guy at WPI, Bill Martin.
Okay.
Who does things with like intersecting lines and stuff. It's cool. He's like, we're on like the train riding somewhere. He's like, man,
You should do this.
we're going to do this together. Like,
All right.
okay.
So you're getting there with them? Is it something you do much? It's very weird, strange skill. All right, I'd be happy to talk to you about it. Yeah. And sometimes you can be completely stuck. And the worst thing is when you think, I'm doing really well. As soon as my head says out loud, wow, I'm going, like I just got 5 in a row, it's like, that's it. You suddenly get sort of pushed back out to the, like you can't swim in it properly. Yeah, it's really interesting. Okay.
Well, when I start thinking of answers in other languages, that's just like...
Okay, that's bad. Okay, team, sorry. Let's go. So we're going to talk about the rich gets richer model. It's I guess it is the rich get richer model. True. Anyway, I'm going to probably say gets a lot. But anyway, fundamental kind of feature of all sorts of social aspects of the world and the natural world, right? So, and we'll see this kind of play out in different ways. Okay, so we're going to work through that model. We're going to talk about this debate between Simon and Mandelbrot, and we'll look at how Mandelbrot approached it, which is this optimization thing. And what else will we do? I'll look at framings again, these catchphrases, which is amusing. All right, so I just want to say this. We're going to see John Cleese tonight, which is great. He's here in the Flint. This makes no sense to any of you, but some of you, Monty Python, right? So this is quite fantastic. Okay, so this is a random piece. This is kind of fun. Maybe you've seen this before, but it's kind of got a bit of more news for it recently. But this is about adjectives. And so here's the story. I don't know, let's see if you know this. Adjectives in English have to be in this order. Opinion, size, age, shape, color, origin, material, purpose, noun. This is pretty weird. It's quite structured, right? So the example here, right, in this little tweet here is, so you have a lovely little old rectangular green French silver whittling knife, right? But if you change this around, it starts to get weird. So if you have a whittling French lovely knife, right? Like, and you're like, well, it's right. And you would tell children that's wrong because you know that's wrong, but you don't know that's wrong. Maybe some of you know this, but this seems to be sort of one of those things that's just lurking around. But it's quite a structure, this is, yeah. So, the large old house or the old large house, that sort of doesn't work. There are a couple of, let's see, there's a couple. So then there are some big things, like some pieces that don't work. So the big bad wolf is odd, right? These are exceptions. And then then the rest of this article talks about how that's a sound thing, which isn't particularly well understood, but apparently it's in most languages that the ah goes like this, right? And then ah would come after it. So ding dong, but not dong ding. So it's ah, right? So you can have that order for these things, so like ping pong, not pong ping. We used to call it gnip gnop, which is ping pong backwards and sounds like gnip gnop, gnip gnop. See? It's a reverse onomatopoeia, just sitting there. And then zag, zig, zigzag, cross, criss. It's pretty weird, right? So anyway, but this is when we talk about language as a code, right? And we had this observation from the scaling slides that verbs have become more regularized over time in English and other languages. For the past tense in particular, so we're getting more to, ed is the winning past tense structure, right? S is the winning past tense indicator of plurals, yeah? And we have some others floating around, like children, right? That's, we don't say the child's hurts. But over time, things that sounded odd to say, with ed or with s at the end got replaced, right? People did transform them into these standardized ways. Anyway, this is yeah. There you go. So this last one. So green great dragon, the great green dragon. You would say that, right? But you would not say the green great dragon. So figure that out. Why is that? Why would that be? We're very happy about that. Anyway, so language is very cool, interesting. I was going to show you. All right, so I did some silly things recently. This one is slow TV. This is shocking. So this is a race I did up at Montreal, and I take video because I can't help myself. So basically, I'm like a. You don't really need to hear this. Obviously, it's just the sound of wheels. But this is a half Ironman. So it's, and the thing is, I want to show you this. This is pretty great. This is super fun. I never thought I could do this distance really, but I did. Zinc is the key. Right. I had a pretty severe zinc deficiency, as it turns out. So it's 20. So this is the Grand Prix track. This is an island in the St. Lawrence, and they have over here is the rowing basin from the '76 Olympics, and there's a casino here, and then a big theme park thing here. Anyway, so Grand Prix track, right? So there's the hairpin bend. You have to do this 21 times, and let me just. It's super fun. We just go zooming around. Come on. This is just ridiculous because it goes for over 2 hours, and this is it. This is what it is. But I'll make a 2-minute version at 1,000 miles an hour. So anyway, so this has been a fun thing to do over the years. I have them from lots of places. Last weekend, this is wrong. I should not have done this. So this felt fine. This was good. I should not have done this, but I did. I did one of those Spartan races. That's not my thing. Anyway, this is the stuff that Danforth loves to do. So they did all these people did on the Saturdays, the 5-hour kind of thing. But this is just it's obstacle racing, right? So I'm still very sore. And this is crawling. That's crawling under barbed wire. You know, maybe some of you have done this, but this was the horrific part. You had to fill a bucket with pebbles. You can see spillage here, and then walk around this course here, which is up and down, carrying the thing, and you can only get about 20 steps, and you have to put it down if you're a normal human. So you see the suffering here. This guy's going to put it down. Well, he's a bit of a beast, but that was horrific. A lot of people sitting on buckets, and you had to fill it yourself, right? So you have to fill it. So I think actually I say this in the thing. It's especially punitive, right? You have to like fill the bucket, and if it's low when you come around the end, right? So that's you got to get all the way back down there. Really nasty, really nasty. If you spill it or you didn't have enough in it, you have to do it again. So, and after that, and for me, my arms were shot, and that's why they still hurt. Anyway, I can lift. That's pretty good. So that was just a wrong person doing the wrong thing situation. Okay. Anyway, I have lots of those. They're kind of fun. I have one from last December, which was the last day of December, which was I did a sort of accidental marathon around Ko-Tu, which is the top of Nantucket. This is really kind of great. And there's no one there at all. It took 5.5 hours on a beach, but it was beautiful. Anyway, if you need background nothingness, slow TV. Slow TV, do we know about slow TV? Norwegians are kind of into this thing. They just started putting videos on their trains and other stuff, and they just recorded it all, and then they just show it. I think it started with people chopping wood and stuff like that in the forest, and they just played it on the Norwegian TV, and people loved it.
Is that train thing that they do on Thanksgiving?
Yeah, and they just, it's just the front of the train. It's not looking around. It just, you watch it, right? I mean, people would watch goldfish in a bowl, or the log thing. So it's not a stretch, but this is a real hit. Actually, if you need focus though, this is a good thing, right? Because your brain's, well, it depends on your brain, but a lot of brains are like looking for more information all the time. So you can have this little supper over here, which is like a video of something happening, and your brain can just get a little like something is happening over here, and you do your work over here, right? So instead of like email or something like that, or so that's a recommendation. Slow TV has this kind of nice ambient like supper of your information-seeking madness. That's my issue. Okay, so not many updates. We have this thing due tomorrow, and more stuff is coming. Okay. Tweets. Oh, conspiracy theories. We'll get to that. Okay, all right. Okay, questions? All right, warm up. All right, so so we have this little model, very simple, right? It's going to be a sequence of elements which have some flavor. They could be words, they could be people who live in cities, and the flavor is which city they live in. It could be just little balls that have colors. And the idea is that there's one to start with. The next one that comes in with probability rho is just new, is different to everything that's come before, and with probably 1 minus rho, you will randomly choose from any the things that exist. So you really actually have a sequence of them, copy it, and that's your new piece. All right? Very simple mechanism. So can we study this, right? It seems pretty clear that you can simulate that. You could write a little, so that's actually in the next assignment. What you would have is this growing list, and for flavor, you can just give them integers, right? So the first one could be just a 0, and then if you have a new one, you call it 1, right? So let's imagine that one unfolding. That's exactly what you would do. So you have you can use whatever coding thing you want. So the first one will be 0, so this is time going this way, right? So this is time 1, time 2, we just have a 0 to start with, right? And then maybe we don't innovate, we just replicate something that exists. You choose from everything that exists, there's only one thing, right? And maybe we do that again. So this happens with probability 1 minus rho, we just choose again. And then with probability rho, so I'm sort of trying to indicate that, right? Maybe we flip a coin that has rho and 1 minus rho sides. We'll just say that's a 1. And then maybe we're going to copy again stuff that came before. So it's going to be 3/4 of a chance that it's a 0, 1/4 of a chance that it's a 1. So it's probably going to be a 0. So you're kind of going to get this going out. So you have lots of zeros depending on rho, right? So, and then eventually out here you'll get a 2, and then 2 has a chance of being copied. But you can see this is a bad situation for you if you come late in this sequence, right? So the 0 is going to have the best chance of being copied. So you're going to have more of these zeros. And then 1 will be the next one on average, right? It's going to be some stochasticity. But that's the idea. And then at the end of it, you count up how many zeros there are, how many ones. So this is just a way of coding it, right? This could be any symbol. You could put, if you wanted, you could call this A, B, A, C, right? What's going on?
The probabilities out of 21 that are on the slide, are those the sub-probability within the 1 minus rho?
Yes, exactly, right? So you have 2 stages. Good. So you flip a coin, which is weighted weirdly, and with probably 1 minus rho, it says choose something from that exists, and then we have 21 words already. Yeah. And so this is then right, exactly. So given you're copying, that's what happens. Yeah. So it's going to be 1 minus, to get this word here repeated. Perfect. 1 minus rho times 2 times 21. 2 over 21. Exactly. Mm-hmm. Good? Yeah. So, and then you just have, once you've done this for long enough, you have to go and count everything, depending on your language. That's going to be easy or whatever, right? How many zeros you have, how many ones, how many twos. And you can make a histogram of that, which will be a Zipf distribution. Seem okay? So it's a really simple mechanism, So rich get richer thing, that's what we have. Again, because if you're really dominating what exists here already, then you've got this great chance of being chosen again, and then you just build on that. So there's competition between things that exist, of course, right? So there's competition for replication. Elephant means element. I'll give you a little flag to wave or something. Okay, so it could be caffeine based. Maybe that's what it is. So we have competition between, so these are important points. The competition between specific elements in being replicated is even, right? So the chance that this 0 and this 0 are replicated, let's say at this point, right? That's both one. This one has a 1 in 5 chance. This one has a 1 in 5 chance. This one has a 1 in 5 chance, right? But the zeros collectively have a 4 in 5 chance. So that's the difference. So there's random competition between individuals for replication, but there's a non-trivial size selection that's happening between groups. However, we don't have to say to the new one, count up how many groups, count up everything. We don't have to say to the new one, you need to count up everything and figure out, oh, look, there are 4 zeros and 1 1, right? So now I'm going to make a special little die and roll it and choose, right? And when you've got 10 million of these, that becomes very onerous, right? That's an onerous mechanism because you'd have to know the whole distribution right now and then roll a really complicated die and choose from it. If it's just randomly select from someone who exists, that's a bit better, right? You just go stab and copy that one. The Jerk, there's a scene from The Jerk. Anyone see The Jerk? Steve Martin, right? The serial killer? Yeah, right. Telephone books, right? No one knows what that is. All right, okay, sorry. But that's the mechanism we're looking at. Good, okay. Okay, one person. Okay, so it's biased by size. Yes, that's good. Random selection is easy, and you don't have to have great knowledge. And we'll talk about this again when it comes to networks, because the first model for, well, not this new model by Barabasi and Albert, that was not the Simon model, actually did have a very onerous mechanism. You would need to know everything. Anyway, we'll get to that. We talked about Polya. So Polya was the first return character, right? And so Polya is here again. This is to do with earn models. Because we could think of it as a big, whatever, if you don't like the word earn, like a box, and you have one ball in it, and you flip this funny coin, and if it says replicate something inside it, you randomly choose from the box, pull out, find that color, make another one, and put them back in. And just keep doing that, right? And you get this growing box of balls. And if you have to put in a new one, you just do that. Okay, so again, this is sort of the 20s and 30s. Let me just find some of this. There's all sorts of stuff here. Maybe I don't need to say all these things, but there are lots of it. So it's kind of funny so there's this idea of a framed as a Chinese restaurant problem, which means it's circular table. So you imagine, which is, because mathematicians love to do this, you imagine an infinite set of infinite round tables so that you just randomly choose from a table and sit next to someone, right? These are all sort of variations on these things. But the idea that they're growing and that the distribution is being changed and affected all the time is, that's an interesting problem to deal with. Okay. Yep. So you get replacement, you put the ball back in, but you add more. Okay? Too much? Plan? Okay, so let's see how we do it. So we're going to line up some equations that will govern how this thing grows. And there are different ways to think about this, but I'll give you we'll go through the way Simon did it. It's a beautiful piece of work. Okay, is this thing alive? It never works for me. Why do you not work, you sad thing? Okay, so a couple of things. We're always adding one more new element every time. We could change that if we wanted to. This I mentioned before is a steady growth of new flavors, right? So there's always a probability row that you put in a new flavor, a new word, or you start a new city. That's just growing linearly. This is not true in general, of course, and there's this thing called Heap's law for language, which shows that the number of words, the vocab grows, it rolls over. We're not going to talk about it today. We could add these other pieces, right? So you could have things disappear. You could have them swap colors if you want. People could move between cities, or you could change your friendships. You could certainly vary the innovation rate. It might be fast to start with. These are just possible things. And these, so these have been explored both for Simon's model and especially for the network story, which is, maybe if I haven't said, scale-free networks is the Slightly weird terminology there, but that's what people call it. Okay, so yeah. And you can play around with this group size selection. So I'll talk briefly about that later on, but this is, so say we're here again, we've got this 4/5 of a chance of choosing a 0 and 1/5 of a chance of choosing 1. Well, we could just mess with that, right? We could raise it to some power, so we could make the rich get much richer or the rich get a bit richer. Like we can play with that, and that gives you some different behaviors, and that may be true in the real world. Surprisingly, the linear thing is fairly common. Actually pops up in real data. Okay. And I just want to say, you could imagine this is a messy thing to look at. If you have some growing system, you have one instance of it, this is a stochastic thing, so being able to then do a good job of going back and saying, oh, the mechanism underlying this does seem to comport with this simple rich gets richer thing. There's some early work on it, but really getting at the details of it, that takes into the 2000s for people to really produce papers that do that. Okay, so I first heard about this from this book Krugman, a book by Krugman himself. It's a very thin little book. There's a very small chapter on Simon's model. And this book was handed to me by a very large Venezuelan volleyball player that I met at Santa Fe Institute, and who's now at Oxford. So he said, oh, you should read this, right? And so it's funny, and this is where I found it, right? So I'm looking through this thing. He didn't really cite it properly, but this is kind of, I looked at it recently, right? So in a completely impenetrable exposition, which we're about to enjoy, right? So anyway, so we'll go through this. So Krugman had trouble with this, but I remember. So I was at MIT actually, and he was there for a year before he got poached to Princeton or something, and I wrote to him, and ridiculously he replied and gave me the actual reference because it wasn't in this book. It's from Biometrica, 1955, and it's got a terrible title. Okay, there you go, Alvaro Cartella. Big, very funny guy. Anyway, so yeah, true. Pi. Okay, don't worry about that. All right, so let's do it. All right, let's think about it. So we're gonna have our groups. There's going to be I groups, and you can imagine they're kind of ordered by size naturally, right? So the first group will be the ones with zeros or A's or whatever we want to call it, the colors. So we can kind of imagine that'll work like that. We want the number of groups of size k at time t. We need to think about that, and we need to kind of worry about what will happen as t goes to infinity. Certainly as t goes to infinity, we get an infinite number of elements, but we should be, hopefully it approaches some sort of stable distribution that at least is, it's growing, but there's a stable form to it. So that's what we might hope. So how does this thing evolve with time? So a couple of pieces we're gonna just throw in here. So this looks like a mean calculation, but so this is the total number again of groups of size k. So each group has k in them, so k times that number will be the total number of individuals in groups of size k, and if we then go over all group sizes, that will be the total number of elements in the system, which has to be t, because we start with 1 at time t equals 1, and we do it, so we have a very simple thing. Is that okay? So things collapse a little bit, but it's because we've got this very simple mechanism. So after 33 time steps, there will be 33 elements. Fine. Important normalization. All right, so we've got that. We have that hanging around. So now we want, because we have to figure out this probability, and we have to think about what that probability will be probably like, right? Because this could have been, 0, 1, something, something. This, if we run this, it's probabilistic. It's going to be different every time, but we're going to look for the kind of average behavior. What's the expected distribution that we'll get out? So, and we'll pretend that it's kind of exact, and we'll look at the errors later on. Okay, so this is the probability that we choose an element that belongs to a group of size k. So there, again, this is a thing we've just said is we need to understand what this is. We have this many groups of size k at time t. And again, that's how many elements there are that are in groups of size k. We have t overall. So this is going to be the simple story. The probability we choose one element that's in a group of size k is this little beast here. All right? All right? Total number of elements at time t is just t, and this gives us, so if this k is 1, then this is a 1, right? So we should probably of choosing a group, an element of size group, an element that belongs to a group of size 1 is just the number of groups of size 1 divided by t. Right? They all have 1. Okay. So this is the sort of key thing that's going to be, this really is the rich gets richer story right here. This little inflation that's happening here. And when we come to networks and we say, what's the probability that you, we kind of, we put this mechanism in that says you randomly attach to someone, but you do so proportional to their degree, then this is going to be sitting there as well, right? Because this k will now be the number of friends. Not the size of a group, but the number of friends a node has. So it's going to take the underlying distribution and multiply it by k, which tends to push that distribution, right? So you have some distribution of these guys, multiplied by k, and that tends to skew it, right? Skews it. Right. Okay, so let's write down a little equation to see what happens for the number of groups of size k. So how does it change at time t? So it could be that an element is replicated that is in a group of size k. So that means that we lose one. It's going to belong now to a group of size k plus 1. Right, so we've got a, maybe k is 10, right? So we have this group of 10 words that are the same, right? Chicken, 10 chickens. We get a new chicken, so now that is a group of size 11. Right, so we're going to lose one of n10t, but n11 is going to get one as well. It's going to get a plus 1. And that's what this is. We could take a group that we could add one to a group of k minus 1, and that will add to our number of groups of size k. Fair enough? Simple thing? Okay, so how do we write that down? This is basically the story. It's going to be minus 1, right? We lose 1 in this case. In this case, we should, well, let me say it here. We're going to get 1 plus 1 at time t plus 1, time t plus 1. We're going to plus 1 more. And then, well, let's put down the pieces. So we have the probability that this happens, which is, right? So your question again, right? 1 minus rho, which means we're replicating. And then this is the chance that we choose a element in a group of size k. Doesn't matter which one, but it's in a group of size k, right? That's that piece here. So first of all, we're replicating, and now we choose one of an element of in a group of size k. Same story here with the 1 minus rho, right? We're replicating, and it has to be a group of size k minus 1. So we just shift this k down, right? So if we're talking about k equals 10, this would be 9, n, 9t, right? So this is the number of groups of size 9. We have to multiply it by 9 to get the number of elements in groups of size 9. Seem okay? So just a little shift like that. Okay. So far, nothing too horrible. We'll do something sneaky in a second. We have to be careful for the number of groups of size 1, because this is going to be a different thing, right? So there's no, I mean, if you wanted to, you could think of, well, you shouldn't do that, but number of groups of size 0, you could imagine they're the ones that don't exist yet. They're sort of on the bench, right? You could, if you want. But this is a boundary. So we're going to have the same story if we have a new elephant is added, right? If we just get a new elephant, a new flavor, a new element with new flavor, a new city has started, it's a new word, we haven't seen it before, then the number of groups of size 1 increases by 1, right? This is for language, this is the hapax legomena, words that appear once in a text. So this is the change from the previous thing. This now just happens with probability rho, right? This is our innovation rate. And the other part where they're leaving, that looks the same as before, right? So we could have an element that is by itself in a group. There's only one of them. It gets copied and replicated. Now it's a group of size 2. So we lose one of them. And that happens with probability that we replicate and that we choose one of these elements of that are in groups of size 1. This is really 1 n1 divided by t. Right, again, the core thing is pkt equals k nkt over t. So when k is 1, we just have this, right? There's a 1 sitting in here. All right? Very exciting. Okay. All right, now and then we have to do math. All right, good.
What does it mean a unique element is replicated? Explain that.
Yeah, unique here means there's only one of them
Okay.
so far. This word appears once in the text so far, or it's a city with one person in it. So the unique means a singleton, right. Yep.
This is only in the special case.
Yeah, so this is a special case just for this one. So we have to worry about that. And the previous page is for k in general greater than 1.
Basically always unique, or most of the time. Unique with probability row.
Well, so you have to. So we have some world that exists at time t, and we have some number of elements that appear once, and we don't really care what. So we're not going to worry about what that is. It could be any distribution. So this is just a very general statement about how this thing grows. This probability row. That's a. So you have this coin you flip, comes down and says, new, innovate. It's for what? K equals 1. Yes. We okay? Yeah, I'll just say words until you tell me to, yeah. It's very important to tell me to stop when you understand. Right, so these two slides will look pretty much the same, but we're going to just replace K with 1 on this next set and then deal with, and the big change is just for this innovation, right, where we get a new thing that hasn't been seen before, and that happens, right, it depends, it's just row, it's just a fixed thing. Doesn't matter about it. The rest of the distribution, we're just going to impose that. And the thing is that row is usually small, right? We don't usually start new cities or add new words to our text too much. I mean, somewhat. But it could be anywhere from, so sort of 10% down. Or, put in this, it's a 0.1 down. It could be quite low. Okay. The game we're trying to get to is, well, first of all, does this produce this parallel size distribution that we see over and over again? And if so, what's the relationship between this microscopic mechanism, right, this mechanism, and that form of that parallel, right? So that parallel has some exponent, and it's going to have something to do with rho, probably. I mean, there might be something about the fact that it's discrete, that, there may be some other aspects. Slow raising of hand.
Yeah, so in that bottom line, that n sub 1,
Yes.
that's specifically not an n sub 1 comma t.
Yeah, yep. Thank you.
So that should be n sub 1.
That should be, yep. Yep. The sadness. You could think of what you're doing here as debugging the words I say. Which is life. N1T, and this is frame 21. We okay? Horribleness?
No, I didn't.
Okay, thank you. That's good. Exactly. This should be M1, comma T. Go a little sloppy there. All right. Let's see how many others have trouble like that. Okay. So if we put everything together, then this is what we expect to be. So this is going to be a funny thing, right? So this is average, right? This is the average behavior. I use these brackets because it's fun. So these angular brackets. So this is the expected change as we go from time t to t plus 1, and we're looking at groups of size k. Well, this can happen, right? So it can be plus 1. There's the size effect. It's plus 1. And here's the probability that we just argued for, right? This is probably the element in a group of size k minus 1. It gets replicated, so it becomes a group size k element. So that's a plus 1. And then there's a -1 with this probability, right? If we lose one, it gets replicated. And this all happens with probably 1 minus rho. So we've got this blob, there's going to be a minus sign, so this is a plus aspect and this is a minus aspect. And what we're going to do is say, okay, and for k equals 1, so now it's fixed up on this slide. It's the same looking thing, except what will disappear is this, this first term is different, right? So the first term is going to be, we get one new one here with probably rho. And we lose one with probably 1 minus rho, and this is written out in full. This is the whole, this blob here properly. Yeah, there are less lies on this slide, okay? I'm sure there's still plenty. But, so this is the expected behavior, right? Okay, so we're gonna write like this, because we're trying to get some, we run millions of ensembles, millions of simulations, and we make a big ensemble. We're trying to get the average behavior. So the sneaky thing to do will be to say, okay, let's see how far we can get if we just say this is really what's happening, that this is on average what's happening. We're going to move away from saying that, in the simulation, you either lose one or gain one, right? It's +1, -1. There's a real simulation. You can count them. There are no non-integer numbers of elements. But that's what we're going to do here. We're going to say that, on average, it's going to get maybe a little more in this box. And if we let it run, we let it run, it's going to sort of pick up the right thing. It's going to start to say after a certain amount of time, the numbers in the, say, the 17 bin will add, if we run it for 1,000 time steps, this thing will be kind of okay. So there are two things we're going to do now. We hope, and we have to sort of check that this works. The wheels may come off completely, but we're going to say let's see if this thing produces this, right? So that the number of groups of size k times t is just some number times t. Eventually, that it just grows linearly. So this is just a guess. This is a guess. So if this thing, it's never going to stabilize because this distribution is always growing. We're always adding more things in. This is actual number, it's not probability. But if it starts to grow in a way proportional to t, then we'll have something that's, in the infinite limit stable. Oh, is it sad? Okay, no idea. All right. Okay, let's start again. We're going to do this, right? So we're going to assume that our distribution grows linearly. And we're going to just drop the expectations and say this is how this thing is going to grow. Oh, that's right, it's on the wrong thing. So we'll have this, the possibility, we'll certainly have this sort of fractional aspect to how things grow. It's fine for large time scales. Something that we'll need later. Let me just put it in here. So the number of groups that have size k. Okay, right.
So,
yes.
what do you mean by drop expectations?
Yeah, so back here on this previous slide, we're saying this is what we expect. This is our on average change as we go from time t to t plus 1 for k in general and for k equals 1 here. Now we're just going to say, let's just let it grow like that. We'll just say the change from time to t plus 1 is just this blob. So this could be 0.03 or something, which is not going to happen, but over time, this is going to roughly be okay. It's a naughty thing to do, but it works. And you check all sorts of stuff, but yeah. Okay, so this is something we'll come back to later on. So what's the number of groups of size k as a fraction of the number of total groups? And so the total number of groups, if you think about this, on average you get a new one with probably rho. So after t time steps, rho times t will be the expected number of total elements. Right? So if there's a 1 in 10 chance that you get a new element and you run it for 1,000, then you expect to have about 100 unique elements, right? So roughly every 10 time steps, you'll have a new one. And so by the end of it, you'll have a dictionary of a size, after 1,000 time steps, you'd have a dictionary of size 100, 1,000 words, but 100 unique words. You'd have 100 unique cities, right?
What's the little n again?
So what was that?
Little n subtable. What's that?
So it's introduced here. So this is the number of groups of size k at time t. These are multiplying each other, right?
Right, yeah.
This is just a,
T times something.
yes. And so this is going to be something we hope is a asymptotic constant.
So that's not something that we can measure. Yeah.
Well, given the assumptions we make, yes, yes, yes.
Oh, and
So these are the equations from 2 slides ago. This is what we had, right? And we're going to replace those blobs with the little n times t, whatever it is. So this will be little nk times t. This will be little nk minus 1 times t over here. Right, so that's what's happening as we go from here to here, right? So we're dropping the expectations. And then this is a kt plus 1. So now we have just nk times t plus 1. And this will be nk times t. This one will be nk minus 1 times t. And this is nkt. Yeah, now we're just going to say this is, yeah. You know, we can't really deal with this. We're going to say, well, let's approximate, and we'll get to something we can solve, and then we'll look at how well that does. And it turns out to work very well. It has some shortcomings, but we'll get to that later on. So this is not bad. So we can deal with this, right? So we'll just join this up. So we've got a t plus 1 minus t here. So we'll put these guys together, right? They're both multiplying nk. Then they're going to cancel. These things are going to cancel over here. This is t over t, so they're gone. So at this point, t has disappeared from the equation. So that's promising, right? We made this assumption that we could, do this thing, that nkt, we hope this is true, times t, right? So blob times blob. And now we have a thing. Given that assumption, it's sort of work. It's consistent, right? So now we clearly have an expression that involves the little n's, right? Nk and nk minus 1 over here. There's some k's floating around. There's a row here. So now we're in difference equation world. There are other treatments here that could turn this into a differential equation, and you could solve it. Okay, but this is a difference equation problem, which is very enjoyable. Okay. Right, so we're going to play around with things. We just have nk times 1 here, so that's on the left. And then we're just going to combine a few things or clean things up. There's a 1 minus rho still here. K minus 1, we're just putting this down here. And then minus k nk, right? So clearly we should put these characters together, right? These nks. So that would be a 1 minus rho times minus k. We put that on this side. So it'll be plus. Okay, so that's nk. Here, that's that one, and then 1 minus rho k, that's this blob and this blob. And it was minus, so it's plus. Right. And what's left on the right-hand side is 1 minus rho times k minus 1 times little nk minus 1, this blob here. So okay? Exciting? But you've got nk, now we've got nk blob equals blob times nk minus 1. So this is pretty good. It turns out you have to think a little bit about how to deal with this. And that's a good problem for you guys to work on. So here's just the rate. So we have the ratio. So we know how we've got nk minus 1, we can get nk by multiplying by this blob. And we'd like to know what's the asymptotic behavior. For large nk, what does it look like, right? So this is this little n, right? So it's the number of groups of size 1, number of groups of size 2, 3, 4, 5. And that's going to skew out in this direction, right? So there'll be very few groups that are very large. And there'll be one group, the zeros, for example, that's really large. That's the rich. And there'll be many of these ones that have 1 in them, groups of size 1. So it's going to be this power law size distribution. This can be solved exactly. That's an equation for you guys to play around with. You can mess around with it and just avoid a lot of things and just kind of get the tail of the thing. That's a Taylor expansion piece. So there are a couple of problems you can work on. But this is what comes out. Eventually you get this little nk is proportional to k, and here it is, it's minus, and here, this is all that appears, right? The row is the only thing that matters. 2 minus rho over 1 minus rho is equal to, so it's a power law decay, and we're going to identify gamma, the decay, as this blob. So the exponent is gamma equals 2 minus rho over 1 minus rho, and we can write that a little more helpfully as this, 1 plus 1 over 1 minus rho. So let's sort of think about the limits here, and that's something you can do again in the assignment, I think. So low innovation rate, I know it's on the next slides, but low innovation rate, this will be close to 0, right? Not many new things. So in that case, the rich right, that first one gets to replicate a lot, doesn't have much competition. It takes a long time for the others to come in. So this will be close to 1 plus 1, so this is going to be close to 2, right? This will be 1 over 1 minus a very small number. This is basically 1, so 1 plus 1 is 2. So that's that limiting case of, right, a power law decay with exponent 2 is on the cusp, or close to 2, is on the cusp of infinite mean, right? We had 1.5 or 3 halves for the random walk story, 5 halves for that ridiculous Holtzmark thing, the random movement in space. But this is on the cusp of having an infinite mean. So this is a very skewed distribution. Right? Minus 2 means it's a pretty fat tail. But certainly, and then so rho could go up to 1, right? So rho could be, I mean, you'd have to redo the calculation actually, but rho can get close to 1, which means that you are adding a new element all the time, right? When rho is 1, I mean, in the limit, rho is 1, you're just going to have 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, because you innovate every time. You forget about the thing before. And to get that distribution, you have to actually start again. The limit here doesn't work. And in fact, you see infinity here, right? So 1 minus 1 would be infinity. But certainly close to 1, it's going to be this very large exponent, meaning that it really falls down very quickly. And the interesting one would be as soon as we get to, say, rho is a half, so there's a 50-50 chance that the new one is, the next element is new, never seen before. That's when we have 1 plus 1 over 1 minus a half, so this will be 3. And that's the cusp of going between having infinite variance and finite variance. Did I say the right thing? Yeah. So between 2 and 3, if gamma is between 2 and 3, we have this pretty dangerous situation where the mean is finite. You sample from it, mostly things aren't that bad. But it's an infinite variance, depending on the bounds of things, so that very large things can happen. They can and will happen. But once you get past an exponent of 3, then it tends to be, even though higher order statistics are infinite, not so bad. So that's a important point there. But this is a beautiful story, right, where we have simple model. We had to do some things to it, but a simple model. We go through it and we get this very nice connection. Here's the micro, or the mechanisms parameter, rho, very simply defined. Innovation rate, what's probably the next thing is new. Gives you this big story gamma piece, right? So that's cool. Now, it's a very simple model. It doesn't tell you about everything in the world, but this is a very powerful toy model that actually has fairly good agreement with reality, some kinds of reality. And of course, you can then modify it and play around with it, right? Fine. But this is the base, I would call it the base model of rich gets richness. Okay, so these are things I think I've just said. So gamma goes between 2 and infinity for rho between 0 and 1. Low innovation rate, we have that, right? So it's a wild power law size distribution. Yep. And then high innovation rate, then we get to gamma being close to infinity. And that's where everything is the Everything is different. We just have all the groups are of size 1, right? Different flavors, yep. So it's a tunable mechanism, right? There isn't sort of one, it's a tunable mechanism. You have to measure the innovation rate, and that will give you out this, this overall big story of this power law size distribution. The work that came later with Barabas and Albert, which we'll talk about for networks, actually just produced an exponent of 3. So it was sort of this big result, like, oh, look, here are all these networks that have exponents, or here's a theory, and it just has one exponent that pops out. And it turns out it was a much more limited model, and it kind of gave you this feel that there was this sort of magic in the world, in that all networks would have this one exponent, but that's not really true. So it seems to be that the innovation rate matters. It's a different model. Okay, but we'll get to it. We'll get to it. How does that feel? Exciting. Okay, other things. So Zipf's law, which we've talked about, there's a connection between the Zipf's law exponent. I know this was the online stuff. Alpha is 1 over gamma minus 1 is the connection between them. So again, Zipf's law is rank everything from smallest, largest to smallest, and look at how that the size of those things decays. So this is group size. You know, the first group, the second group, third group. How does that decay? Right, that's a problem you're working on right now. It's the CCDF flipped, gives you Zipf. So we can just put these pieces in. We have alpha is 1 over gamma minus 1. We're going to put in what gamma is for this model. 1 minus rho, it's 1 plus 1 over 1 minus rho. These pieces will cancel, and we get this very simple result, right? So the Zipf exponent is 1 minus rho. And the big story for the Zipf's law is that this exponent is close to 1, right? This is a thing that Zipf measured and said, you know, somewhat. Well, I mean, he couldn't provide a mechanism for it, but he came up with this Homer-Simpson idea, right, of least action for humans that he claimed sort of, you know, gave rise to these exponents. There's not a mechanism, but it was a, you know, his big idea. Right, so gamma equals 2 corresponds to alpha equals 1. That's this really skewed situation when innovation is really low and we get, you know, the dominant thing wins strongly. And as I said, many real systems have alpha close to 1, but not completely. Krugman didn't like, this is a thing that Krugman didn't like. He actually said this in this email. He was like, he wasn't happy about it because you have to have this innovation rate going to 0 to get this sort of so-called, this apparent Zipf distribution that we see in the real world. But, you know, it can be small. Innovation rate can be small. You don't start cities every day, fair enough. It's actually not that bad. Okay. Now, other mechanisms are possible, and that's where all these debates come from. It's pretty clear we have the mechanism, right? So you could, if you can get the history of a system, how it grew, which we can't really for language, maybe, you know, for the actual growth of a real, I mean, we kind of did that. We had the historical, anyway, okay, hard. But it turns out there are some places where we have it in really fine detail, like the growth of the Linux kernel, actually, right? Where you have packages depending on each other. And it's actually pretty good. We have good data. So we'll get to that later on to see if you can actually, you know, take the real data and it's a lot of messiness, a lot of stochasticness. Can we see that this mechanism is actually, you know, playing out? That turns out to be hard. All right, so we have one more piece here. This is good. So we have one more piece here, which is the bottom end, right? This is the groups of size 1. So we didn't tackle them. But this is going to give us some interesting things, some very beautiful results, really, about language in particular. So if we do the same business of getting rid of the expectations, you know, this is the equation we had before, and we're replacing this beast by n1 times t. That's what's happening here, right? n1 times t plus 1, that's this beast. n1t, that's this beast. And this one up here becomes n1 times t. Yep. We can rearrange this one, right? You can see the same thing happens again. This is going to be cancel this one here, so we'll just have n1. And then on the right we have rho minus 1 minus rho. There's a 1 here, and the t cancels here as well. Okay, so we'll just have n1. So this one we can unpack, right? There isn't an n2 to worry about. I'm just putting this blob on this side, so we have n1 plus all of this equals rho. We're going to add these two things together. This is quite nice. Whoops. We get n1, right? So there's a 1 here, so we're going to have 2 minus rho times n1 equals rho, divide through by the 2 minus rho, so we have n1 equals rho over 2 minus rho. So this is the number of groups of size 1. We have to multiply by t to get the total number. But you can see it has this, when rho goes to 0, this is going to be the nice behavior we're interested in. So not quite finished because we have to go back to the total number. But this is, you know, given all the assumptions we've made, this is a very clean result. And so let's put this together. So that's the total number. We have to multiply it by t, so we have rho t on 2 minus rho. And the piece that I had at the end of one slide before is that the number of distinct elements is rho times t. So if we want to find the fraction of groups, right, if we look at groups that have 1 in them, right? So we have all these groups, and we want to find the fraction of groups that have size 1. This is the same as going to the dictionary for a particular text and saying, right, so you have a text, you get a lexicon out of it, right? Here are all the unique words in that text. We're going to go down through this text, this lexicon, and then find what's the fraction of them that these words only appear once, right? Which seems a weird thing to do, have a word appear once in a text, but actually that's what happens most of the time, right? So we're just going to divide that blob up there by rho t. So the rho t's will cancel here, and we get 1 over 2 minus rho. So when rho is close to 0, which is sort of the low innovation rate, is very reasonable, this goes to a half. So it's a fraction of groups of size 1. And this is observed, actually, right? So this is pretty clear. You can play around with this and look at the fraction of groups of size 2. That's about a sixth. And you can keep going and keep going and keep going. So these are words that appear, say, twice. It would be cities with 2 people, cities with 1 people, cities. And so this is quite impressive because now we have this thing where the tail, right, the large K works well and low K works well. That's pretty great for a very, very, very simple model. Okay, so let's look at some data. So this is from Simon's 55 paper. So didn't test in all sorts of ways, but obviously forced someone to count up words in Ulysses. But there are a few texts around that people have done this for as well, right? Concordances would be the story for this. Lots of suffering because we're not using computers. We're just counting words, and we're writing it down by hand. So what do? You estimate the number of unique words. You estimate this probability of innovation by the number of unique words divided by the total number of all words. And you know, his estimate 0.115. So 1 in 10 words is new. And if you do that, and then estimate these, the number of groups of size 1, the number of groups of size 2, this is the actual number of groups of size 1, the hapax legomena. These are words that appear once. So there are 16,000 words in this thing that appear once. There are roughly 32,000 unique words. This is the estimated one. So that's, you know, this is extremely good, right, for a ridiculously simple model. And then it works, you know, going out here as well. N3 is pretty good as well. You know, this is not obviously how the novel is written, but it captures a lot of it. So pretty good. And you get the tail as well. I can't remember if we looked at that. It's quite a beautiful thing. Okay, so we'll finish today with connecting into Mandelbrot. And I want to go through a little bit of a background here. So I've talked about these different papers. There was some work that went early 1900s. But Yule's paper is sort of very famous here in starting things off. And it was about just evolution, right? So this is the number of species per genus was the interest here. So it's a pretty, I'm just going to talk about the catchphrases. Okay. So a mathematical theory of evolution, which is pretty great, right? It's a strong title. You know what's inside. But then it's this sort of gets very specific, right? Based on someone else who I want to be my friend. All right. And then Simon's paper is terrible. You would never, titles matter, right? So you would never get very excited about this. This does not sound very exciting. So he buried the lead in, well, at least in the introduction. Not so bad. So, good, let's read it. So the purpose of the paper to analyze a class of distribution functions that appear in a wide range of empirical data, particularly data describing sociological, biological, and economic phenomena. Oxford, hate. Its appearance is so frequent and the phenomenon so diverse. Sorry, I'm pro OC. That one has led, it hurts. That one has led to conjecture that if these phenomena have any property in common, right? I mean, because these, you can't. What's evolution doing, producing these species, platypuses and things, got to do with, money, right? That's weird. And cities. It can only be a similarity in the structure of the underlying probability mechanism. So, and that's, what we just looked at. He put forth this simple earn model story and did pretty well. Did very, very well. Okay, so you have that, but there's no really good, rich gets richer is the one that I like. And maybe I should see if he says it in there properly. He just doesn't put a good handle on this thing at all. Anyway, introduction tells you where we are. It's good. So de Sola Price, as I mentioned, was working with citation data. So again, this is a very difficult business of going in and actually counting citations in journals to previous papers or forcing other people to do it. Cumulative advantage was the term he came up with. So that was pretty good, right? Catchphrases matter. They really do. So this gives you a sense of really what this mechanism is. This is usually pretty good. This Big Bang, not bad. Okay, and the idea was simple. You receive new citations proportional to the existing number of citations, not the number of citations squared or to the power of half. Right? Those things are plausible. This is very, very simple thing. One way to think about it is reading a paper that has citations in it. And you start to see that, maybe you copy them. And we know that you copy them because spelling mistakes propagate errors of citation propagated through scientific literature ways that people weren't reading papers, they were just citing them, copying them out of papers verbatim. Although I mean that's very think that's the right way to phrase it. Now we have centralized thing. Scholar, everyone should do it this way. This is a direct network, so we're moving away. This is a network. There's just little groups, and there's a sequence which things are added, because it's now a directed network. So you've got this time ways which papers are appearing, and they're pointing back in time. Incredibly rich data sets, and this is back in the 60s. As I said, there's a paper published in Science in the 60s. Now we have, with the advent of the archive and all these other sorts of big sources, incredible ability to study things. Actually, a big result that's come out in the last couple of years is that it appears that, maybe I said this, that an individual's most cited paper, which will sort of equate with most important, appears to appear at random within their publishing history. So this kind of idea that people do things when they're young, right? There's sort of this myth or whatever that's an important, the mathematicians in particular are sort of famous for being only good until age 30 when they get killed in a duel or something. It doesn't seem to hold up actually on this sort of big picture thing. So people's biggest spike can kind of happen randomly. So there's always hope. There's a number of people have been working on that and seem to have the same story. So a couple of things you have to worry about this. New papers have no citations, so if you want to have this Simon mechanism, they have a 0, they don't exist, so you just give them a bump, right? So you just sort of put a +1 for everyone. Everyone gets +1, so you can just change it like that. And then the selection mechanism is maybe more complicated, but that's okay. That's okay. Okay, so Merton didn't work on this, but a very famous character in sociology, lived well into his 90s. So one of his most important things was looking at the careers of scientists and was able to show that people who did well early on got funding, they got all sorts of things, and credit started to flow to them in ways that were, and so he called this the Matthew effect, right? So this is from the Gospel of Matthew. For to everyone that hath shall be given, but there's actually more to this. So this mechanism is not just the rich gets richer, it's the poor get poorer. From here that have not, that which he seemeth to have shall be taken away. It's actually a bit stronger than that. It's and cast the worthless servant into the outer darkness. There men will weep and gnash their teeth. That's not in It's not in this. You could create the full the Gospel of Matthew mechanism if you want. Anyway, so a little bit of selective reading. So hath is a suggested unit of purchasing power. There is, unfortunately, this is terrible, Matilda's effect, which is that women's scientific achievements are often overlooked. It's very bad. Give Nobel Prizes to the wrong people. Okay, so Merton, very famous character, as I said, catchphrase, human, came up with self-fulfilling prophecy, role model, unintended consequences, which people use this all the time. The idea of a focus group, so he called it a focus interview, but focus group. So lots of, he framed all of these things and possibilities, and they became very real. His son won the Nobel Prize. That's the Black-Scholes equation, random walks in finance. So well done him. Okay. I met him briefly years ago. All right, so Barabasi and Albert. Let's get our rest of our things here. So they were thinking about the web, and Barabasi, very famous character now as well. So he's at Northeastern now. They were at Notre Dame, and he had a student, Rake Albert, who had some time left at the end of her PhD. Her husband was still working on one, and he said, well, let's do this thing with networks. I've been thinking about it. We should be able to do structure, the dynamics of networks and dynamics on networks, 6 months. So we're still working on that. It's 20 years later, but they got a fair way with one model, which they called the mechanism preferential attachment. Same idea. So you'll see preferential attachment talked about a lot. So undirected networks, fair enough, but it's this sort of citation story again. You have web pages, because they were thinking about web pages on the Notre Dame website, and so a new page comes into existence and it points to pages, right? You have links to pages that exist. That's the idea. So it's a bit trickier because you now have to do this thing. If you're a new page being created, you have to know how many pages are pointing to other pages. Right? This page has 300 links going into it. This one has 20, and then create some big probability distribution and then sample from it. That's tough, right? That's a hard thing to do. The solution actually, or the way to make it actually function without any trouble, is to actually just randomly connect to existing pages, or nodes in this case, for the abstract version, and then connect to some of their friends, if you like, or some of the pages they link to. So you just randomly find some friends. So if you just go into a social environment, randomly find some friends, and then become friends with their friends, those friends will be disproportionately well-liked. So we'll come to this result later on. It's very disappointing, is that your friends have more friends than you. This is just what happens in networks, on average. Some of you will be in front, but on average, your friends will have more friends. It's very disappointing. They'll have more citations, lots of it. So there's a generalized friendship paradox. It shouldn't be called paradox. It should be just disappointment. Hopefully they'll have committed more crimes and had more diseases, but it's sort of this thing that's being studied. They're more interesting than you. So, okay, so this is called scale-free networks. We will get to that. And I'll tell you a little bit about some work we did at the start of next Tuesday, and then we will get into this showdown between Mandelbrot and Simon, which played out dangerously through letters to each other over a period of years. All right, thank you. Thank you for dealing with the troubles. Okay.